Hey family, welcome back to Reclaiming the Throne. Today we're exploring a fascinating question. What if Africa was never colonized? What if the continent had been left alone to develop on its own terms? What would Africa and the world look like today? Long before European ships arrived, Africa was already thriving with advanced civilizations and powerful kingdoms. The Mali Empire was one of the largest and wealthiest empires in world history. Mansa Musa, who ruled in the 14th century, remains the richest person ever to live. During his famous pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, he distributed so much gold that he caused inflation in every city he visited. His empire had universities, libraries, and trade networks spanning across the Sahara Desert. Timbuktu wasn't just a city. It was a renowned center of learning with hundreds of thousands of manuscripts covering astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and philosophy. Scholars from across Africa and the Middle East traveled there to study. The Kingdom of Benin had urban planning that stunned European visitors in the 15th century. They described streets broad and straight that were always kept clean. Their bronze sculptures were so technically advanced that Europeans refused to believe Africans made them. The walls of Benin, 4 times longer than the Great Wall of China, were the largest earthwork in the world before the mechanical age. Other African powers included the Kingdom of Aksum in Ethiopia, Eritrea, with its own written language, Ge'ez, and currency dating back to the 3rd century. Great Zimbabwe's stone structures that demonstrate architectural expertise, still impressive to modern engineers. The Kingdom of Congo with sophisticated provincial governance and early diplomatic relations with Portugal as equals. The Swahili city-states that conducted trade with China, India, and the Middle East, as evidenced by porcelain, spices, and coins found at archaeological sites. Now imagine these civilizations continuing to develop without disruption. Political organization. Instead of Africa being divided into 54 countries with artificial borders, we might have seen powerful African federations, or even a United States of Africa, united by shared values, languages, and cultures rather than colonial boundaries. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, where European powers carved up Africa without African representation, would never have happened. Ethnic groups wouldn't be artificially divided, the Maasai wouldn't be split between Kenya and Tanzania, the Hausa wouldn't be divided between Niger and Nigeria, and the Congo people wouldn't be separated by the borders of Angola, Congo, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Governance systems. African political traditions could have evolved naturally into modern systems. Many societies already had sophisticated checks and balances. The Ashanti constitution limited the king's authority through a system of councils. In the Oyo Empire, the Alafin, king, had to consult with the Oyomesi, 7 counselors, who could even force a ruler to abdicate if necessary. These indigenous democratic principles could have developed into modern systems without colonial disruption. With full control of resources like gold, diamonds, oil, and rare earth minerals, African nations would have built infrastructure for themselves. The wealth from Mali and Ghana's gold, Nigeria and Angola's oil, Sierra Leone and Botswana's diamonds, and Congo's cobalt would have funded African development instead of European enrichment. Consider Ethiopia, which defeated Italian invaders at ADWA in 1896, and maintained independence until Mussolini's 1935 invasion, or Japan, which industrialized on its own terms without colonization. These examples show what's possible when people determine their own destiny. Cities like Lagos, Accra, Nairobi, and Johannesburg might rival or exceed New York, Tokyo, or London today. Timbuktu and Aksum could have become global centers for science, art, and philosophy. African architectural traditions like the Great Mosque of Djenné or the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela would have evolved uninterrupted into the modern age, creating uniquely African metropolises blending traditional forms with modern function. Africans were already technological innovators. Dogon astronomers knew about Sirius B centuries before Western telescopes could detect it. Tanzanian blacksmiths produced high-quality steel 2,000 years ago, using furnaces that reached temperatures Western technology couldn't achieve until the Industrial Revolution. These traditions of innovation would have continued and expanded. Without the slave trade, over 12 million Africans and their countless descendants would have remained in Africa. That's potentially hundreds of millions of people who would have contributed to African society rather than being forced to build wealth for others through enslaved labor. Economic shifts. Without enslaved African labor, the cash crops that built enormous wealth in the Americas, cotton, sugar, tobacco, wouldn't have been as profitable. The Industrial Revolution, often credited solely to European ingenuity, was significantly funded by wealth from colonialism and slavery. Without this exploitation, Western development would have been slower, while African nations would have had the capital to invest in their own industrial growth. The African diaspora. Without colonization and slavery, the African diaspora would have formed through power and opportunity, not oppression. African merchants, scholars, and diplomats would have traveled globally as respected representatives of powerful nations. The University of Sankore in Timbuktu, already a center of learning in the 15th century with thousands of students, might rival Oxford or Harvard today. Traditional educational practices like the Yoruba apprenticeship system could have evolved into unique approaches to technical education. Medicine and science. Traditional African medicine gave treatments like kaolin for diarrhea and quinine for malaria. This medical knowledge, combined with Africa's vast biodiversity, might have made African countries world leaders in medical research and pharmaceutical development. The griots, traditional West African historians and storytellers, would have continued their unbroken chain of oral history. The Epic of Sundiata might be as widely studied as the Iliad or Odyssey. In global politics, everything would be different. International institutions might be headquartered in African capitals, the global financial system might be based on African currencies or gold, international law might incorporate African philosophical principles like Ubuntu. Climate agreements might reflect traditional African approaches to conservation. African languages like Yoruba, Swahili, Amharic, and Zulu might be as commonly studied worldwide as French or Spanish. So what would Africa look like if never colonized? It would show excellence uninterrupted, rich in resources, culturally unified, and thriving on its own terms. A continent that doesn't just survive but leads. Though we can't change history, we can shape the future. By understanding what was taken, we better understand what we're working to rebuild. By imagining what could have been, we clarify our vision of what still can be. Thank you for watching, family. If this video sparked something in you, drop a comment below, share it with someone who needs to hear this perspective, and hit that like button. We're not just remembering history, we're reclaiming the throne.